this budget work session is to order. Ms. Meeker, will you please take the roll?
Ms. Boucher.
Here.
Ms. Campbell. Not here. Ms. Hastings.
Here.
Ms. Higgins. Mr. Richards.
Here.
Ms. Robinson.
Here.
Ms. Sadowski.
Here.
Ms. Walsh.
Here.
And I am here. We have a quorum.
Great, and we lost Mr. Dunn.
Tell me that.
I will
Not for long.
But I will add that we now have peaceful artwork to look at. That's better than nothing.
You did.
I love Simone. Huge fan.
You gotta sit over here. And you get to see.
Wait, is this my old
Trying to
one?
avoid screens.
Kathleen doesn't cover contact.
We know who she
We
is.
started and then realized Mr. Dunn is out of the room. That's all right, we'll be good.
We are live.
Yes. Well, you know, I think one thing we can, sort of out of order, but one thing that people need to start to contemplate is we had our first meeting with the Memorial Field, meeting with the city, and whether we want to put in funding in our budget for the design phase of the project.
Yeah.
And I don't know if Mr. Richards wants to report.
The design phase is estimated at this point, $1.5 million total. So if it was 50-50, it would be $750,000 each.
How much have we already put into the 70, right?
70.
Yeah.
So.
Okay.
So it'll be a point, it was just an initial meeting, but we will get more information, and I encourage you all to give your questions or channel your questions through Barb and I who are on this committee. From the city side, it's Nate Fennessy and Jeff Foote. And then, of course, we have our supporting people like Matt to give us the technical information and hopefully give us all the facts that we can make decisions. So it will ultimately come back to all of us here. So just giving you a quick update, and I'll let you know we're meeting the next meeting is scheduled, I believe, for April 1st, right?
Yeah, well, it was
It was 4th or
the
somewhere in there.
Recreation director can make
Yeah.
it first at 4:30 is the
Yeah.
tentative date.
So tentatively, first week in April.
Okay.
Okay?
Quick question
Meeker.
about the design phase. Is that for sort of the everything in the kitchen sink situation? Like it's for the phase 1, phase 2, A, B, C, D?
That's one of the questions we wanted to discuss. How much is the design phase and how deep it goes? And because it's a pretty expensive design phase,
Yeah.
in my opinion. So I'm hoping it's for everything and provides a lot of detail, but there's still a lot of things we need to work out.
Okay.
That does feel like a lot.
I mean, when they presented it to us, it was all of the design and permitting work.
Yeah.
Okay.
For if we, because I know that we kind of talked about like, well, what if we only did phase 1?
Right.
But this is anticipating that at some point we would complete all of the phases and their sub-phases.
That is my impression, but I will be asking for a lot more details and a lot more breakdown of that, number at our next meeting, and so I'll let everybody know.
Great.
Great. Thanks for being there. Appreciate that.
Yep, thank you. It was my pleasure.
And with that, Mr. Dunn?
Yes. Okay. Well, we have both screens working.
Nice. I don't have to scoot anymore.
Working on the
Look
third.
right past
Working
you.
on the third, and then any
Like I can
sound
see that far
possibilities.
away.
It's a bigger screen. You'll be able to see.
We're gonna put the better stuff on that screen. We also handed you out a new budget book. There's nothing substantive. The changes that did happen, this is what's posted online, 1.0, and this is 1.1. But just thought you should have it, and if you go to page 3, version 1.1, it just tells you all the changes we made, which some of them were typing, some of it was a number, and stuff that just we felt comes out. So they're it. But that's all. Other than that, everything is still the same as presented, but we thought you should have a copy of that.
Gotcha.
Okay? So the agenda tonight is, first there'll be district class size guidelines, which Superintendent Murphy will go through, and then follow up on some of the items that we didn't get to last time. Some are on here we did touch, some we didn't, so we'll move through those. Then we'll have a discussion about transportation. We have a one-sheeter that we did not hand out on some of the work we've started. And then anything else that you have, and then the public information. And if there's anything we missed, we'll throw that under other, okay? With that, I will put that for class size guidelines.
Right, you can see, we put a couple of slides up for tonight. This class size policy was the discussion that came out of the instructional committee. The committee was asked to look at class sizes. We did some research, we provided some data to the committee. They deliberated, and so on this particular screen, side by side, you'll see what the current policy is for the district. And it's done a little bit differently than the proposed, but you can see that it's broken out by kindergarten, primary, and intermediate, and you can see that it's done by ranges. And the size is the target, in the middle, kind of the middle range. If you look at kindergarten, we like to see it at 17. Doesn't mean that it can't grow to 20 because that's acceptable, but the optimum for kindergarten currently would be 17, primary 21, and intermediate 25. The changes, or the proposal, is on the other side, and you can see that the recommendation is in kindergarten is between 14 and 19, which is a reduction of 1 at the top end. Not to exceed is what the committee really thought was the best way to deal with it. What?
There we go.
Okay, and so grades 1 and 2, they broke it out much more defined than the original policy. So grades 1 and 2, not to exceed 20, whereas in the one currently was up to 24. They've brought it down, and I think most people would acknowledge that class size is important in terms of instruction, and I believe that was the intent of the committee. Grades 3 through 5, 22, and as not to exceed, and grades 6 through 8, 24, and again, a little bit lower than what was proposed, what is current, and then high school varies. The committee felt that the high school needed some discretion. You can get a bigger class, but you have youngsters that perhaps may not be as active in a classroom, so there's some flexibility there, especially based on when students need a class at a particular time in their schedule. You don't want to hamper them accessing that class because it's a little bit larger class. So that the committee pretty much anticipated that and thinking about that, and that was what was proposed. Brenda, did I kind of capture that pretty well?
Yep.
So the question becomes, what does it mean if you haven't adopted the proposed policy yet? We tabled it, I think back in the winter, early winter perhaps. Sarah?
Oh, you can finish your thought.
So I was going to show you what would the proposed policy look like in terms of your budget. How would that impact your budget? So if we went to the next slide. I looked at what the class size is for next year, okay? So just for next year now, 1 year only, there would be no changes. We would be within the policy, the proposed policy of 19 students. We would not have that problem. In first grade, however, we would need another teacher. Based on the numbers, we would need one additional teacher and a classroom. So we also looked at teachers and classrooms, because you can't just put a classroom in if you don't have a place to put them, right? So we knew that. At grade 2, the classes are at capacity, so that was what we were concerned about, because if they're at capacity, it only takes one student, and if you go over that, then does that mean that we have to trigger another teacher? And that's what I was trying to be careful of.
Ms. Robinson?
So I was part of this conversation, and I remember part of what we were talking about is giving you and administrators flexibility to make the determination if being at capacity or adding one more student would be sufficient. It would be a case-by-case basis. I remember that being a part of the conversation. Additionally, one of the questions I had was, yeah, we in a committee have sort of, brainstormed these numbers, but have the teachers been able to look at this and give some feedback, some representation of them to just
The
give some insight?
principals have seen this.
The principal, okay,
Not
that's
the-
sufficient.
Not the
In-classroom teachers?
classroom teachers have not seen this.
Okay.
Classroom teachers are very accustomed to the numbers. They look at the numbers. What's the mid range? What's the high range? And that's what they use.
Mm-hmm.
And when they're concerned about their class sizes going over,
Mm-hmm.
you see that right now. I think at Beaver Meadow we're at 22 and 23. And so we were concerned about that, and we've been watching that.
Mm-hmm.
But it didn't go over that 24, right? But it was close.
Mm-hmm.
I take Millbrook, first grade is all 20. So one more student in those classes puts me over. The board did give me or indicated to me that there was some wiggle room on behalf of the administration to be able to make that decision. I just want to be clear, when the teachers and the staff see a policy that is specific around numbers and you go over it,
Well, yeah, that's why I asked if teachers had seen it.
Right.
I
Well,
didn't.
we had also discussed a stipend if a teacher is willing to take 21, something, an incentive for somebody to not have to start a whole new classroom. And again, that would be up to the discretion of the.
Although then that becomes a bargaining issue, and it becomes,
part of the
it's not a
bargaining unit,
management issue. Like our
decided. Is there
current
another
policy gives discretion and says we should consider adding an aid
Correct.
if we go over the number. I don't remember whether
Right.
the
Our,
proposed.
our concern with that was that we haven't been able to fill those positions
Yeah.
as they are. So just by saying we put an assistant in the classroom, if we don't have somebody to do it, it's an empty
Empty
promise.
promise, yeah.
So I just want you to know that there is some impact on your budget when we move to that new policy. That's all I'm saying, if you base it on that. If there's flexibility, then that has to be clearly communicated that yes, it might say 19, but we could go to 20. So that's.
We have not voted.
No, you haven't.
On that policy.
No, you haven't.
Okay.
But the question was, would it have an impact? And when I looked at it, I mean, what I considered classes on the watch list, I had in grade 1, I had 5. In grade 3, we had 3 classes, and in grade 5, 6. So there were a lot of classes right on the cusp, if I can use that word, and that's what I'm concerned about. Because you're
Beaver
right
Meadow's
there.
been a problem with their numbers for years, just right at the high anyway.
Right.
So I think this shows that
Could we just go back the slides?
Yeah, go back.
Go back one slide.
Yeah, just like this.
And I think also we were trying to ease the burden of teachers in the classroom and students in the classroom. I think that's why.
and following
best practices.
and research that shows the smaller class numbers, you're able to make more gains with students. And
Right.
so in the long run, this is what we felt was best for students.
And that's particularly true in the primary grades, the early grade levels having smaller class sizes. After 4th grade, there's less of an impact on class size as it relates to student performance. And that's
Mr.
research.
Yes, but we've looked at this prior years.
Every year.
Earlier years, we've looked at this a bit. And the question is that at Beaver Meadow, which are always right there, so you end up with, 41 kids in 2nd grade. So do we divide it up and then now have an 11? What do you do? Do you bring it down below the 14 or below the numbers that you're 15 you're looking at?
Well, that's what happens when you start, when
Right.
you add, or if you even subtract. Somebody said, well, you could, last year, remember we looked at classes and we said, okay, what if we went to 2? But then you were over, you would be 25 in each class. So we
Yeah.
couldn't even do that. Because the numbers are very close to where your recommendations are, it provides less wiggle room to be able to do anything. Because
Yeah,
you either
okay.
have a low class size because you add a class, or you have a high number if you reduce by 1. Do you understand what I'm
Yep.
saying? Yeah. So
Only so many buckets.
Yeah, so that's why we watch it really carefully. The flexibility of adding a paraprofessional in the class is a good suggestion. That when they go over that not to exceed amount would be a remedy that I think would be valuable to that teacher. And a lot of districts will do that.
How was the initial or current policy determined? This was before you. Does anyone
That-
know?
Really old, wasn't it? More
Policy.
than 10 years old.
1982, right?
Yeah.
It was
That-
No
really
one
old.
knows like how that, because I just see like the initial policy, at some point it would have been on the cusp and the higher end anyway. So what's to say we would still be on the cusp? The point of the proposed policy was that A, we were helping students who are higher achieving, and we were helping those who may need more assistance, as well as helping staff reduce the size and retain staff. This all came about because there was concern about not being able to retain classes if class size goes down.
Retain teachers.
Retain, yes,
So-
I'm sorry, yes.
So we're not debating the policy here
No.
tonight. It's a question.
It's a budget impact.
It's what's the budget impacts, so we can bring that. We wanted to wait until we knew that.
So right now, we would definitely need to
Could you
bring
go back
in.
to the?
Right, we
slide
would
with
have to
the-
go back, we would have to go back,
There.
and we would need to add at least one teacher over at Beaver Meadow.
And is
And then
there
I need
space?
to be ready to know that if we have any increase, you're going to go over capacity in at least 10 classrooms. Now, will that happen? I don't want to be an alarmist here about this, I really don't, but it's the data. It's what the data says.
Yeah.
So we'd have to add between 1 and 14 teachers.
So, Mrs.
potentially,
Meeker?
yes.
Yeah, so I just want to take a big step back because I'm sure some people are probably wondering why we're having this conversation tonight. And so I just want to kind of give a quick arc of how this came about, which is that the policy committee and the curriculum and instruction committee came together for a joint session to discuss what it would look like to review our class size policy because it hasn't been changed in a long time and it requires review. Some brainstorming happened, some ideas came out of it for what a new policy could potentially look like. At that point, the district said, hey, there's a lot of monetary implications with adjusting these numbers. Please give us an opportunity to put together what those numbers look like, the requirements for infrastructure changes, the requirements for staffing changes. So it's all dollars, right? What does moving those numbers even slightly translate into as an impact on our budget? We've all been very busy. And so I think that sort of larger proposal has been sort of floating along on the back burner all along, and now we're smack dab in the middle of budget. It was in our executive, like the very first proposal, because it's just been coming along with us. And tonight was sort of the opportunity to say, hey, we haven't forgotten about it. Kathleen's trying to give us a quick read on what we're looking at for staffing, but I do think it is a little incomplete in terms of sort of that larger, like, what does this mean for us in terms of infrastructure? If we reduce it, how will we accommodate it for classes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera? And there's no dollar amounts associated with
Right,
these increased
because it
positions.
was only one position, and we knew that one position was
123.5.
yeah.
Right.
So it
So-
would require that one position.
Right. So I just want to make clear that there's no budgetary ask related to this conversation right now. This is still very much a what could be.
Right.
But I think we definitely, for myself, wanted to make sure that we were honoring the very healthy conversation that happened at the committee level. And so maybe it's not appropriate for this budget cycle, but now we have a quick snapshot of that actually isn't too many teachers to add if we wanted to consider it. Like, so I just wanted to provide just a little bit of context.
Although I think what she's pointing out is we are on the edge. And I think one of the things that I was concerned about with the draft policy that I read, it was like it didn't answer the question of like, okay, you've set classes, you've set your budget, and then another kid moves in. What do it sort of left that
Right.
unanswered, which I think is the big.
Well, that's again a discussion we would have to
Yeah.
have as a group, because there's several options that we explored for that. but they all have pretty significant.
Right, so if you did that and you approved the policy, then again, that isn't tonight's job, right? It's really about budget, but if it was, then I would be bringing back to you when, in fact, that happened, so that we could make some decisions about how do we do that? Is it a paraprofessional? Is it another teacher? And you've got to do that before school starts. You can't just do that when school starts, because I would not support moving children after school begins and they have their friends and they have their teacher and they're bonding with. That's very precious to children, and I want to respect that. But I would be able to bring you where that problem is, and we look at enrollment every month, and you have a good idea where we're at, and I would bring you some recommendations about how to handle that, should you at some point move to a policy.
Right. Mr. Richards?
Just a point, we're not discussing budgetary items in this one, but, we talking teachers, we'd have to add a classroom at Beaver Meadows School, which they're currently using any little spare space for the preschool, and you'd have to make the assumption that we're going to see less preschoolers, and I wouldn't be willing to make that assumption. I'd expect us to see more preschoolers. So now we're talking about building.
Beaver Meadow is a problem with classroom. That's why I put it up there, because we have 3 preschool programs. We had hoped at some point to add a preschool program to Krista McAuliffe, and so we're looking at that too, but it could be the preschool program from Beaver Meadow moved to which would free up some space.
Yeah, the key though is that it's not just a teacher, it's another classroom.
Right.
Physical plant.
Sure, if you create another class, they got to put them somewhere. So we just need to keep that in mind.
You have anything more on this topic?
Not on this.
Okay.
Could I take some liberties and review a couple of other things around questions that we've had from the community, or would you rather
Sure, yeah.
defer
Yeah,
that?
I think
Okay. I just want to respond to some questions. We get emails and questions from the folks in the community, so I thought it was important to respond to them. One of the questions we have was around the 6-day schedule and the rotation that happens at the elementary schools. And I understand why we have that schedule, because you have to understand that they have art, music, PE, computer, class, library. They have a social emotional class with a counselor every week. So in order to do that and provide all those programs, they have to have a 6-day schedule. There also has been a real push for PLCs. You've heard that before, right? The professional learning communities where grade levels get together and look at student work, authentic student work. They also analyze data. They're constantly looking at data. That's been a real push in the district to look at where our strengths and weaknesses are, which children need additional support in what skills. That's all done in those PLCs. I think we have shown evidence in this district that PLCs are effective. I think if you remember Chris Gallo's presentation around her Distinguished School Award, one of the things that she said ticked this whole process off was PLCs. The fact that her teachers at grade levels got together, spent time together, because normally in a schedule they're not always together. This is a time when they build a schedule to give them time, a 40-minute period to talk about student work. So I think it's important that people understand that. In assisting in those, they don't just, it isn't just the teachers, it's the principal sits in on it, the reading specialist, and often our math coordinator providing additional work, for additional training and PD with the team. So I think it's an important program, and I think we would be remiss to take that away from our teachers, and I think it's been a valuable source for them. The second question we had was around our social emotional programming. It's been in existence, this work has been in existence pre-pandemic, 2018, when they had Project Grow. Some of you who have been around for a while might remember that program. And that Project Grow initiative was in the schools. Back then, they were using responsive classroom. Choose Love occurred, right after the Sandy Hook situation, and that curriculum was developed. And most recently, we're using Wayfind at middle and high school. And I know that people are concerned that is social emotional learning taking time from our content, right? Are they taking time away from math and reading and science and social studies? The way it's been worked out with the committee, the social emotional committee that has been working on this for quite a while, is two 15-minute blocks in the elementary school to be able to just have that time to discuss the concepts. And the concepts are concepts that are to use our middle school principle, they're all about kindness. They're all about making good choices. They're all about good language. So youngsters have lessons around those things. It used to be when I taught, it was character education that we had, and it was mandatory, and I had to teach it. And so it's really shifted from that concept to this social emotional learning, which really became, as you know, much more popular, especially after the pandemic when so many of our kids were really struggling, having been isolated for so long. So I just wanted folks out there who had sent that question in to know that these programs are reviewed by professional boards, and they're evidence-based and best practice. So it's not like a program ripped off some shelf. Mm-hmm. It has been a proven program to help children with those kinds of skills. I believe that in April, the instructional committee will hear another presentation on the new programs for social emotional learning at the middle and high school level. So we'll stay tuned for that.
Questions? Anyone? I just have one question.
Yeah, sorry.
The PLCs, if I'm asking this question correctly, that takes the teachers away from their classroom for 40 minutes. Who covers their classroom?
Those art, music, PE, library.
Oh, is during those
yeah,
times.
during those times.
Okay, and so does that correlate with the 6-day schedule as well?
That's
like
right.
You need
That's
to have
right.
the 6-day
Right.
schedule so
In order
there's
to
more
be able to
meeting
do that.
times
Right.
so that they're not taken away from the class.
Right.
Mm-hmm.
And they have Project C. That's true. I didn't mention Project C. Kim just reminded me, the science program that comes in. Mm-hmm. That also is part of their
Built-in planning time.
that they use. The teachers go into the classrooms, do Project C. That allows the teachers to step out and do the PLCs.
Mm-hmm. And how often do the PLCs meet?
Weekly?
It's every other week.
Every other week? Okay, every other week. Some questions came up about our wellness program, our student and staff wellness, and our director. And I think that position is really integrated into our CEL program. It's been a very powerful program. I think I don't have to tell you that this program has brought over $10 million worth of grants to our district to address trauma, to address mental health, and restorative work with our kids. It also, we've had a great connection with our community partners. Riverbend, NAMI, Concord Hospital have all been partners. We also have part of that wellness program is our behavioral intervention team, which kind of monitors student behavior. And we work with agencies in the community, including the local agencies, staff, Concord Police, the social worker that they've hired works with us, as well as parents are on that committee. So again, we're trying to monitor youngsters, and this group under the direction of our wellness director kind of oversees that. So some people had some questions from the community about that position, and I wanted to be able to answer that. Another question that came to my attention was why are special education teachers spending all day in meetings? So I think it's first of all, our teachers do have an obligation to sit in on IEP meetings. They must, by the way. They're part of a team. It's required. But they're not there all day. They're there for their student, and then they move on. Now, there may be some staff that we see sometimes that are in those meetings for a while, right? Like a speech and language person or an OT or a PT may have multiple students that they're reporting out on. So they may be in meetings on one particular day. Each school designates a day where they have those meetings. It's helpful because, remember, parents have to be part of that team. So they're in attendance at those meetings. But there may be occasions when there are certain staff members, maybe even the school psychologist who may have done multiple assessments, maybe in a meeting, more than one student meeting, and it appears that they should be back in their office, but they are required to be at those meetings. We have no choice. And the documentation that comes out of those meetings requires their signature and that they were in attendance.
And we discussed this a little bit with the student services budget and the different types of specialists that we can have. Some who need supervision during direct care, and that having that, I don't want to say lower level, but allows for the people who need to be in the meetings,
Right.
be in the meetings and supervise.
Another position that there was some question about was a reading specialist, right? Every school every elementary school has a reading specialist. That is required by ED 306, which is state standard. You must have a reading specialist. I think that the concern may have been because we only have a math specialist, math coordinator for the elementary. We have one. There's no expectation in state standards that we have a math specialist. I think there would be some people that could argue that point with you and that there should be one in every building, but it's not required by state standards. But the reading specialist is required to be employed in every elementary school building. As you know, we also have reading specialists in our middle school and as well as in our high school because it continues all the way through. So. I think I just wanted to clear that up.
And I would thank you. These come from an anonymous letter that came to my house, and I wish we knew who sent it so we could have this discussion and follow up. But I'm glad you answered some of those questions
I thought
here,
it was important to
I hope
answer them.
they heard.
I hope so. Let's see. There was several questions around the central office staff, so I thought I'd just kind of indicate where we are with staff. I think Jack passed out in front of you a sheet. Jack, you want to explain that for me?
Yep. So you should have a handout that says 2010, 2011 versus 2022, 2023. Okay, just so you have it. I printed the last time we went through this exercise. We're in the process of updating it. I just didn't feel to make sure it was proofed and all and have everything for tonight. We figured we'd reprint this, and I'll just tell you where we're at. But this kind of shows you the position, what it was in 10, 11, and whether it still exists today. And just as a quick overview, if you, at that time when we did this, we were, for general fund, we had 36.10 FTEs versus 37.28 FTEs. So that's 1.18 more. And I'll just highlight that this was done also after the report from the 2019 event with the teacher. And the safety compliance officer was added as a request from the board. And then in 2022, you also had the DEIJ that was added at the request of the board. So there's 2 FTEs. So when you look at what the administration has changed over 15 years, right now I just did a quick pass and updated it, and I'm at 1.54 with those 2 positions still there. So it's not, now roles might be changing because you'll see in here, you might see, well, maybe not in this one, and update it. Director of Student Services is now Assistant Superintendent for Student Services.
And we're glad to have you, John.
Yep. We had an assistant superintendent. There's now assistant superintendent for curriculum instruction and assistant. So titles may have changed. People shifted as they've changed. And we also tried to note when new people came, because post-COVID there was an exodus. Probably about 3/4 of this office changed. So this will give you a baseline, but on the 24th we'll give you the 24-25 or 25-26, depending on. We'll do both, and you'll see, because there isn't any ads really in the 25-26. But yeah.
You're talking about in 15 years, you're talking about 1.5 positions change in 15 years, and it's just a fact. I mean, we just want to give you some data, and so you have an understanding of positions here at central office. And I get it, you know. You're own kid, you have been doing this for a while. What does central office do, right? So you always hear that, right? So I wanted you to have that.
Now, we haven't gone back and quantified the number of regulations that have been added since 15, or the unfunded mandates, but that's just a side comment.
We also received a couple of inquiries about McKinney-Vento and thanks, Jack, and the federal legislation that around those rules, and we have rules that we must follow. And if a family moves to Nashua and their school of choice and they were residents of Concord, and their school of choice is to remain in Concord, then we have a responsibility to transport them, and we can't avoid that. It is the rules and it is the regulations, and I know that you see that. We've talked about transportation and how expensive, but that is one of the reasons that the McKinney-Vento federal legislation requires that of us. And so we try to control costs by sharing with a district, and we do that. We share the costs and we split it between the two districts. Because we're keeping the kids, right? So that helps them, but so they'll pay for help pay the transportation.
And I think, you know, as when we talk about these costs, we talk about them a lot because they are costs that we're trying to figure out how to manage better. But it doesn't mean they're not worthwhile costs, and that they may be regulations, but they're also the right thing to do for kids and their ultimate education. I think it's always important to remember that, especially as we see some of our surrounding districts making cuts that will hurt all students as a reaction to legitimate costs that the state should be chipping in more for.
And we looked at other positions here in the office. You know, communication director came in. That was certainly a priority for the board. You know, and making sure that good communication was coming from the central office, coming from schools, keeping people updated, working with our local media folks, right? Making sure that information gets out and it's accurate and it's timely. And you know, I think the board was able to do that by having a communication director. I think it's been a great asset to us, and it's been very productive in helping to keep information flowing and improving the way we did it. By the way, the web page and finding things and making it a little bit easier for everyone to understand the information that we sent out. So that's been a position that's been really incredibly helpful. The grant position, you've heard that before. The grant position has been extremely valuable. This year, our grant coordinator oversees over $12 million worth of grants. That's just this year's grant money. That includes the entitlements as well as portions of our competitive grants. That's a big task, and there's a lot of paperwork. We're most anxious to hear what's going to happen now that the Department of Education in Washington has been downsized rather significantly, so we'll be watching that very carefully. But again, and by the way, that position is funded by indirect costs. So every year, Concord gets a percentage from the Department of Ed that allows us to use part of the grant for indirect costs. That means the cost of taking care of the grants, writing them, doing all the reporting back to the state and to the federal government. And so ours is 2.1% of any grant. We can use for indirect costs. And because of the amount of grants that we have attained over the years, basically pays for that position. It's not a position that is really impacts the budget. The position around the DEIJ work in the community, I know that that's been a lot of discussion around that. It's just awesome. Concord has this wonderful, diverse community with families from all over the world that are languages that are that we're all learning, right? And we're all learning how to communicate better. And the families are dynamic, and the students are appreciative of the opportunity to be here in the district, and that comes because we have people that are paying attention to our very diverse populations, making sure that there's equity. And it's not just about youngsters of brown and black colored youngsters. It's about kids in poverty. It's about our homeless youngsters. It's about equity for our special education youngsters. I mean, you heard Kylene earlier in the year talk about there are kids that might have special education need, but they can take an AP course. We just have to figure out how to make sure that we provide the accommodations that they might need. I mean, that's what this work is about. It's about making sure that we have opportunities for all children, and that position has been able to help us with that kind of work. And I hope that we'll be able to continue that. And finally, the last position, and this position was created back in 2020, in the spring of 2020, and that was the Title IX Compliance Officer. And it is an unusual position. I will say that most school districts don't have that, but the big cities have lawyers that are in-house. We don't have an in-house lawyer, but our Title IX person has a background in law and is a lawyer by trade, and is able to make sure that we are in compliance with all of the issues around discrimination and the Title IX laws and all the equity laws, and helps us with development of policy, making sure that our policies adhere to the expectations. And I have to say that it's not unusual in the district for teachers and our administrators, as well as our parents, to reach out to our Title IX compliance officer for her advice, and works closely with families and staff, and works with the local departments, the police department, the social worker, and those folks in the agencies, the JPPO, when necessary. So those were questions that people had about those positions, and could we cut them? Could we release them? I think they've been valuable positions in the district. Obviously, those are decisions you have to make, but I felt it was important to respond to the questions from the community that I've received, and that you have too.
Ms. Boucher?
This is just a comment to reiterate kind of what we were talking about here. As I look through this list, this spreadsheet, the positions that I see that have been added since 2010, 2011 are positions like the DEIJ coordinator, the early childhood coordinator, out-of-district coordinator, homelessness coordinator, director of staff and student wellness. So to me, that is a direct result of the change in our society and what we as a school district are now required to provide in order to support our students. And I think this is really a call to the community to say, if you don't want to pay for these positions, then we've got to start doing some work outside of the school and working together, because this is definitely necessary work that has to go on for our school to function.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Any other questions? Okay. Let's move on to the next topic.
Thank you.
Thank you, Superintendent.
I'll try to start where we left off last meeting. I'll start off with, so I rehanded out the packet from Wednesday in case you didn't have it. So if you see the very first sheet, that says draft across it, and I'll answer what I can based on my discussions today with the athletic director, and if there's more than that, we can bring him back. He was covering a hockey game tonight at 5 o'clock. I told him our meeting was at 5:30. I'd make him first, but I don't think the hockey game was going to be over in 29 minutes, and he could be
No.
here in a minute. So I tried to.
And it's a playoff game.
Then
We're leading
there you go.
2-1. Is it the boys tonight, right?
Yeah, 2-1, they're winning.
Boys?
They're going to.
I think so.
then he was just trying to be nice to me. He wasn't coming here. I don't blame him.
Sure. Yeah.
So
yeah,
good.
there.
Team Stexon.
There's a heavy eye roll in there.
Started at
5 o'clock. Yeah.
Nice.
Not 5:30. Okay. So for the athletic uniform replacement, this plan was developed in conjunction with the vendor that supplies all the booster clubs. So they know what that rotation is. He sat with them and they went through it. All the uniforms are all mid-grade. And they're for whatever their representative sport is. Obviously, you get into some of the sports like football, the jerseys, they're just a little bit more durable because of the nature of the sport. It had nothing to do with the. It's just the way they're made. They're all the standard that way.
Is it, so it's $400.
Yeah.
Is it just the jerseys? I think.
No, this is jerseys and pants.
Okay.
Oh, so
Usually, when we get into the helmets, that's all falls under equipment, which we have been providing. I think I may have noted before. It used to be with the helmets, you get them refurbished every year, and you can still do that. But once they hit 10 years, they turn it into a 5-year car seat. You got to chuck them. They got expiration dates now.
I mean, with brain
That's-
injuries happening on
Yes.
fields,
So
I'm totally okay with
that's just a newer expense because if they're 10 years, there is no refurbishing. They're
Yeah.
gone. So, but that's usually filed under, and we've always covered that under the equipment line of things. But just the basics. Usually it's pants and shirt. Okay. So that's where this was derived from. And that's broken. So next, and sorry, if it says budget year 2025, he's just a year off on each. And I just wanted to confirm that. So that should really say budget year 2026. 26 should say 27. He's just looking at as we're preparing the budget right now.
Yeah.
I look at it differently because of the accounting piece of it, not the
Yeah.
in presence
Your
piece of it.
darling money
Okay?
brain.
So you have that information. Then we go to the athletic trainer. So we had a lot of discussion about that. Pre-COVID, during COVID, we used to use a company, third party, to manage this. We have reached out to that company. They have not provided a quote yet. I don't know whether we'll get one. We did reach out to another one who did provide a quote, and it was $100,000. So what some may have in their head from before we
It was a lot
contracted out,
less.
about 37,000
Yeah.
is no longer 37,000. So on the second page that I handed out in that packet there, you see the first line, and this is from the NHIAA article from their handbook, and it talks about the importance of long-range safety, and that, quote, every high school in New Hampshire must make provisions for licensed medical personnel at all practices and contests. These types of provisions that are acceptable are the provisions that are in alphabetical order, not the preferential order. So they talk, number one, not preferred by them, but not just what you need. Athletic trainer, then you have a certified sports therapist, emergency medical technician, nurse practitioner, physician assistant, and the bottom line would be number 8. I think that's what you would be starting to head to with a contracted service because they're having trouble finding people. If they have to manage a sport or manage an event, they might go there, but they're on call. So you have to call them if something were to happen.
But so we're basically so the athletic trainer can only be at one event at a
Correct.
time.
Yep.
So what are we spending, if anything, on all the other sports that will be having games and practices
Yep.
at the same time?
Yep. Right now it's under what the coaches get trained for, which is the, how do I have here in my notes? I wrote all this in there.
I'm just wondering, would we have better coverage with the contractor or not?
No, that's just to provide one person. That's not to provide a person for every sport. They're
It's just
on
one
call.
person
Yeah,
on
they're not
call.
gonna-
Okay.
So what we do now is the one position that healthcare, was it the health coordinator, which is our nurse practitioner, our RPN that signs off on our wharfs. She is also covering events. So what he has told me, if it's a playoff game, you absolutely have to have some, and they try to make sure the scheduling happens. But like he said, if it's a football game, he will not have without somebody physically being there. He said he would cancel the game if he could. And usually when there is problems, typically it's the home team that offers the athletic trainer.
Yeah.
If in fact we're in trouble, they will call and see if there's a courtesy, and they will bring their trainer, and they all try to work it out amongst each other because there's such a shortage. And whether it's and if a person is hired, which is where he's told me districts are heading, that is going to be the preferred method. And if they work for a company and they can get into a district, that's typically what they do because it's just more stable. You're not here, there, and everywhere, which is somewhat understandable.
Thank you.
I would say what we have into our trainer is less than the 100 that you're paying now.
What did you say? I'm sorry, I missed that.
It's less costly for the person we already have.
And there's a number of things that they have to track. We talked about how the pass off from the nurses and to the athletic trainer, because say a student fell or was injured in school. What was that injury that they may have to track through, especially if it's a head injury? Then there's concussion protocols. So they all work together to make sure that happens. Can it happen with a contracted service? Yeah. I'm sure they have their system, and then it's just they're embedded into the school, and I think that is typically a 12 to 8, sometimes 11 to 8 job. So we also have to understand that they're going to come out more towards the latter end of the day because they have to cover the night portion
Yeah,
of
that
it.
continuity of care, I think,
But-
is very important.
But
If that
the
were my
one,
child, I wouldn't want someone who had experienced a head injury in a sport. I don't want them to have to call someone to come from who knows where to come to check my
To
child out.
verify your
Well,
kid's pupils.
They still might. I think it's important to know
Yeah,
because
it doesn't mean
if
it's-
there is a
yeah, they,
basketball game and a hockey game going on at the same time, they're going to be
But
one.
they would still be in the same city, in the
Yep.
at least like with the Memorial Fields close to the high school.
well,
I think
as an
it'd be-
example he brought to me that happened in the fall, I won't get into the game and the school and all, but it was the opponent, and the kid played the game. They were all congratulating afterward, and then the kid collapsed, and there was breathing issues. So our trainer was there, and they took the actions they needed to. But he said that's the biggest nightmare you worry about, whether it's on the ice rink or because it's a collision sport, and something were to happen, and you have to call 911 or somebody from somewhere. Time is of the essence, depending, if they're not breathing, talking brain dead, whatever. So,
Miss
yeah.
Hastings.
Just so I can get clarification, because as I read the NHIAA requirements, you have to have somebody at all of the practices in sport and games. But they don't have to be physically there. We just have to have somebody that could get there.
Yeah, well, all the coaches are trained in CPR, first aid, heat, illness, and concussion protocols, and that all happens 3 times a year at each of the meet the coaches' night before the seasons. So there's already basic first aid, but obviously it's incumbent on the coach. Hence why we don't have an athletic trainer. I mean, you saw what the class size would be if you have to have an athletic trainer at every one. That's going to be a whole different expense.
Right.
But they have basics to be able to go with that. But what it is, it's just the strategic on what events to cover based on the risk of the sport.
So we might, if you had hockey and football, well, you wouldn't have hockey and football.
Potentially, you could. Because
In
they are-
November, being
Right.
Yeah, a little crossover, a little bit. Yeah.
You decide which one they were going to be at, and then the coaches would know to call if they had an issue. But you would also call the fire department or EMS as well.
Yeah,
right?
ultimately, they probably, if what happened there and there
Yeah.
was nobody there, the coach is probably not.
So that's how it doesn't mean that there has to be an athletic trainer at every practice and at every game for every sport.
No.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that was clear.
I know, and the way it does sound, it sounds that way. That's
Right.
why I had to rehearse this with him. But and when I saw the 8, I just felt we would be going from a 1, 2, and 8 potentially, because we do have basic medical.
Right.
But in the event that we talked about in the fall, it's a little bit more than a coach probably could handle
Yeah.
or want to handle. So, okay.
Okay.
So it just gives you that background. All right. If it's okay, I'll move on to the debt service for Memorial Field. You had asked for what that would look like. Now, this is,
The whole shebang, or half of the whole shebang.
I figured, let me just go to the high level, and what I did is I did a 20-year and a 30-year bond. Because I have no idea.
It's the thing that makes you
Yep,
feel 100
the two
years
different
old.
schedules.
Oh, yeah, okay, that's
Yeah.
the one.
One, you got to pull out the glasses, or, one
take
is a
mine off.
20-year, which goes to 20, 40,
can't
20,
see it.
45,
Catherine, do you have
and the
these?
other one goes to 20,
Can someone
55.
give Catherine a copy? Sorry, thank you.
So if you look at the 20-year, the first year debt payment would be 1.285 million. This is assuming, I think, 28.5 million divided by 2, because that's the number that was presented to you, the full-blown Memorial Field, right, do everything. If it was a 50-50 split, you'd need 14,250,000. If you bonded it this year, that amount on the, what'd I do, 30-year for this first one, would be 23 cents on the tax rate, or $80.75 year one. Okay?
Is it below, would it be below our 5%?
Well, I didn't count this in the 5%.
Okay.
If I would, then you'd just have less savings, and you
Okay,
could
yeah,
absorb it.
But
Yeah.
it would be below our 5%.
Right.
Yeah, yeah.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Forgive me. When we're talking about a general obligation Memorial Field bonds of $14 million, what does that encompass? Is that the entirety of the project?
Yeah. I
But
went to
we
the-
don't have designs yet.
No, and I just asked because there was some, get phase one done before Runlet. So I was actually
Yeah.
looking at the phase one,
So we're not looking
but we're
here.
not looking at it.
And I can do you a $6 million
Yeah.
too to show you, but I'm just showing you
Yeah, it gives you a
what
sense.
you're looking at. It gives you a sense of it.
Okay,
All right.
all right.
So that was the 30-year, right? Or no, 20. What did I give you?
You
Just
said 20.
20-year. All right, sorry. 20-year is 27 cents, or 92.96, and the 30-year, which is the lower payment because you're amortized over a longer period of time, 1.16 million. See that on the next page? This is the 30 year goes out to 2055. Yeah, that would be 92.96. The 20-year would be 80.75. Again, I don't know what the city would think on that side, how long they want to go, and I only do this under us. We don't own the property. I haven't even gotten into how that's going to work. So I don't know if it's going to work how we did with the fuel farm, where we pay a portion of that, and the
And
city
pay
owns
on
the
their
debt.
bond.
Exactly. So that just gives you an idea.
Okay.
And again, I can run it for $6 million, and
Yep.
it's not hard, but you get the idea. If I divided 6 into that, you're probably looking at 4. You might be looking at 20-some bucks for $6 million. If we divide that by 2, now you're $3 million. But
You've started speaking an accountant.
Yeah.
You've lost
I-
many of us.
Rain Man took in for me. and I
He's
just-
saying there are dozens of
Yeah.
scenarios
Yeah.
that we could look
Well,
at.
yeah, that's the thing. Like,
But I want
how,
to show you if
how married are we to this 14,250,000?
We're not.
It's-
I was looking at the 6.
Okay.
I'm curious about the 6 million, but
Okay.
We can
but
run
I
it.
think that's
Yeah, and I'm also
But it gives
curious
me-
about this because I think when we're talking about pacing and the kind of conversations we want to send our fellow board members to have is, what is the energy for getting this done within a certain timeline?
Yeah.
If we're thinking about long-range planning and lack of field space at Runlet. So I do think that we need to have these conversations
right,
now,
yeah.
even if it's a scary number that we can't necessarily, decide on tonight. If we don't have the conversation, we can't send Jim and Barb armed with that information,
Yeah.
to their meetings. So I'm all for upfront information. I just think that just
Yeah.
quick context before we talk about it each time so that we know where we are,
Yeah.
what we're talking about.
Thank you.
There's no project plan.
Yeah, there's-
Well, let me say, there's planning, but there's nothing approved, nothing happened.
Right.
You were presented October 7th from the city's consultant, which you contributed. The city and the school districts split the study, 70,000 each. And that's what they came up with and said 28 million to do everything and there's a low start and plan, and you can adjust. But that's all the context of this. I'm giving you the worst best case scenario depending on what side of the fence you sit on.
That being said, like, we're on the verge of our track not being usable
Right.
in the near future.
Stands are going to be a challenge.
The stands are going to be a challenge. So there are, it is a question of that we may have to we won't
Bite the bullet.
We may not have a place to do track if we don't think about doing something.
Well, and the other thing, Jack, is if you can pick a portion of this project, but pay $6 million, and then you're paying that to 2055. Yeah. And then 5 years from now, you have to incur the costs of rebonding or bonding an additional amount, which will be to 2060. Mm-hmm. And then 5 years after that, you do, and now you've taken 15 years to do this project, and you're paying out to 2065. Mm-hmm. And you're paying the additional cost because every time you go out to bond, right, nobody bonds for free. You pay a fee just like you do with everything else. Yeah. So this would, this is something that we'd have to consider as we look at this down the road too.
Yeah, I mean, when we had this discussion about the HVAC at the high school, it was, well, we could break it up over a couple of years, but it made no financial. It actually probably would have cost us more because.
Price escalation.
And the bonding, and we couldn't have used the system.
Alone.
So yeah.
And to keep in mind here, the initial, if you paid, just took us as a small chunk, and you chose, as Jack outlined, it's probably the biggest things that are, in bad shape is the football field related items. Mm-hmm. If you broke this all out, then the football field may get done at a certain time, but we might be, 10 or 15 years of playing in the mud for lacrosse and for soccer, and I'm not sure. We'd have to weigh that. That's our concerns right now too. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of parts of the field that is not in good shape.
Gotcha.
There are some that are in pretty good shape, or okay shape, but there are a lot that aren't. So we'll have to make that decision. I'm not going one way or the other on this because we have a few other projects that are expensive that we're considering in the coming years, but it's something that we have to just keep in mind. So, Jack, thank you for doing the calculations and, Amber, sending this, giving us the payment sheets.
I got to be honest, I'm not going to take that much credit for at least that sheet. That's the financial advisors. I did do the other calculations.
Okay.
Take credit. It's okay.
I did do the hard part. I will.
Okay, you threw this on our financial advisors. Thank you. That's good.
Jim, this is just I don't know if this came up in your meeting or not, or where this would come up, but is there a life expectancy of the fields? Like, who is the one who deems those fields unusable?
Well, typically it's the fire department or whoever inspects the safety inspector deems things unusable. Yes, there are life expectancies on turf fields as well as there are ongoing maintenance requirements for natural grass.
But the track, if you're talking about
track?
that, it's breaking up. And
Breaking up.
So, but
Right.
there has got to be a point where it's like unsafe for students to use it.
We're getting pretty close. We have some cracks that people are running across
the
that are
city
about
will
that
make that
big.
determination.
Yes, the
if
city.
that's the question, because it's their property,
Okay,
so they will ultimately
They must
decide.
have some rubric of how that works.
They may decide on whether it's safe and whether they want to replace it. We may decide on whether we want our kids running on it with a
yes.
risk of injury.
Got it. Okay.
And it's already not safe enough that we can't hold tournaments there.
Right.
Well, and the lighting right now is inadequate to be able to hold any sort of
I
event
mean, I'm
at
not
night.
disagreeing. I just want the public to know
Right.
that
Yeah.
this-
We couldn't decide our students couldn't use it. The city would decide if they're going to close it.
Right. And then if with the lighting situation, of course, you could, make the decision that Concord will only play games during daylight hours and when the weather is appropriate that it's not dark. That has its own things associated with it. Yeah. So those decisions in the future for us.
To this conversation?
Well,
As a facilities
I think
expert?
NHIAA also weighs in on that. So they've looked at the lights. They've made recommendations on that as well. So I think it's a group. It's a city. It's a fire code. If you look at the bleachers, and then I do think that NHIAA has a strong opinion on it, and they let us know.
So does that mean if they don't approve it, it's a recommendation, or they will not allow games to occur because it's unsafe? We don't know.
I'll ask that question. I don't want to just buffalo an answer.
Oh,
So
for sure.
It feels relevant because I feel like we're bumping up against this possibility, so we may as well be informed.
Yeah.
Well, at some point, Concord itself is going to have to decide what kind of city it wants to be, too. I
girl,
mean,
vision.
we keep kicking these projects down the road, we're going to be in the same position, only worse, because these projects have been kicked down the road.
Yeah, because nobody wants to spend any
Right.
money.
Right.
But
Which-
it's like
You gotta
maintenance
spend money to make
requires.
money.
Yeah, money begets money. So.
And totally understand the strain that people are on. But yes, like these are things like part of the issue with the Memorial Field is there was a master plan that was never completed. And I think that's what Jim's focused on is we don't want to pay for another plan that
Yeah.
nothing ever happens with.
Right.
Good call.
Well, and to get to a different subject, but the same principle is the board was criticized for not investing enough in some of our buildings. Mr. Cashman put together the 10-year plan of what needs to be done to maintain our buildings. This year's amount that needed to be done was $1 million. We've already cut $250,000 out of that on this budget, which means we're not funding the maintenance that we should need. And having been on this board for, a little over 10 years, that's what comes up all the time. People say, I don't want to pay that additional amount, don't cut the teachers. So what gets cut? Maintenance. And so, one way or another, you're going to have to make a decision, and the community will have to either say they support it or they don't support it.
Right.
And related to that, Jack provided some information on the adequacy calculation. I was actually hoping we could get a comparison with 25, like this year. So this has 26, the breakout of base adequacy, and I was hoping to see what the number was for 25.
Okay. Oh, yeah, I can go in, let me go in the budget.
I know I asked
But I
for
can
that.
give you the breakdown. At the 24th meeting, I'll give you a side-by-side like
Yep.
that, so you can see the individuals. But if I go into the revenue, let me see if I can find in the.
Yeah, we
revenue.
have the revenue comparison.
Yep.
I was looking for curious about the breakdown.
The breakdown. I'll prepare that for you. But if I look there now, this last year was 18,434. This is page 54 of the budget book I handed out. 18,434,125 versus 18,364,996, which is the 69,129 in less of the equitable education grant. And then on the state education tax was $7,093,067. Now it's increased $7,138,012, or an increase of 37,000. So the net from the state portion, just from those two, is going to be about 32,000 less. So, but obviously the equitable state tax is just taxing the
But more of
same
it's
people.
coming from property taxes.
Right,
That's-
exactly. More and more. You see that shift, and we're working on a graph to show you how the local keeps going up. The state is almost what it was 10 years ago. Just doesn't seem to change, but it's going to tax the same local, but the local just keeps going up.
What is the state using the gambling money from? The lottery tickets, wasn't that supposed to all go to schools?
It does, but it's
not that much.
Drop in the
60,
bucket.
70 million a year. It's not that.
So it's not enough
from
For all
lottery.
state schools.
The moral here, gamble more.
Yeah.
Yeah, right?
Buy your lottery tickets.
Yeah, Keno for kindergarten, right?
I can't.
Gambling for school really works out directly. Just donate directly.
Slots for schools.
I think.
Put them in the schools.
Okay.
That's right.
Yeah,
You provided the staffing adjustments, which we have gone over, but there was an outstanding request for a side-by-side on all changes.
Yep,
in
we're
budget
working on that.
areas?
We're working on
We're
that.
working
I
on
thought
it
I'd
still,
clear
okay.
that. Yep. Yeah, everything that's there. I mean, you could, obviously you go through, in the budget, it shows you side by what lines. Now, what specifically that is, obviously it doesn't say, but it says in broad generalities. Doesn't tell you, and when we talk about cuts, there's things that we didn't even put in here that we cut administratively. And
So-
just one example was a robot to do the lines on the fields. We didn't bring that to you.
We have a robot.
Can we get the Runlet kids to build one?
Yeah.
Well, you could try that, but then I thought if you're starting to build a school and it's a 5-year lease, you're only going to use it for about a year maybe, and that would be this year, because if you started next year, there's going to be no fields to run the lines on. So that's why we're like, it doesn't make sense right now.
There's no grass to put lines on.
I'm sure it could be programmed to do concrete, but
can-
that
it
probably
can
won't go over
paint
well. So anyway,
I have a couple questions for you guys regarding this. This is the sheet I'm looking at, February 19th, 2025. So my first question is just clarification. I had asked about this before, about the 0.3 FTE for the restorative justice coordinator
Yep.
position.
Yep.
And the question being, is the remaining 0.7 FTE that's grant funded still being utilized? So we anticipate filling that position at 0.7 FTE?
Yes.
So
Are we filling the position or are we contracting out for the service?
but well, I'm not going to say we're not filling. We have the position. There's 136,000 in for a vacant position in your general fund. Did you have the breakdown that I did of each of the years of the thing? Or you haven't given that yet? Okay. So there's grant money, general fund money, all next year to cover. So
in there.
to
there's-
cover specifically the restorative justice coordinator position, not the DEIJ director position. I'm talking specifically about the Runlet-based restorative justice position.
Correct.
Okay.
So we
Correct.
have enough to fund a full FTE for that position?
Yes.
Excellent.
Okay, second question. This one is for Mr. Fabrizio. Regarding the occupational therapist addition, I had heard that one of our OTs is currently grant funded. And the question was, is this addition actually replacing the grant? And so we're just maintaining the position but shifting the funds, or are we actually adding another FTE?
So what I would do is so a portion of it is grant funded right now.
Okay.
So what I would do is because I have to be careful not to supplant, not to supplant, but to supplement what we're doing. So there's a portion of it. So right now I would take that OT position out of the grant. That position, make it a full FTE in the budget, and move a different position into the grant, because I'm able to now, once it's a full position, also utilize it for Medicaid, and bill Medicaid.
You're increasing capacity.
You're adding a body.
Or
Right.
adding 0.4%.
You're
I'm adding the
0.4
0.4%
bodies.
into the budget. So the difference is, it's like, so think of one position's going in the grant, and then another one's coming.
To replace it.
Then I'm taking one out of the grant.
Okay.
Okay.
And then adding the 0.4 to it, to the budget,
Okay.
to make it a full FTE.
And it's currently a 60% FTE.
It's currently in the grant right now at 60%.
Thank you.
Okay.
I'm going to pretend I understood all of that.
Okay, so I'll go
Yeah,
one more.
I understand
Yeah.
the shifting. I think
Okay.
just the question was really how many new faces are we going to see next year?
This will not be a new face. It is a face we currently have, and she will be offered if she wants it. But
More time.
more time if she
Same face, more time.
more time to be full time, so she can also supervise the new coda that comes on.
So, but the CODA is a new face.
Coda's a brand new face,
Okay, excellent. Thank you.
and the SLPA will be a brand new face.
Okay, so 2 new faces and more of another face. Thank you.
Yes.
That helps.
Thank you.
Very much. Thank you.
Other questions? Other information that board members would like?
You want to talk about
Okay.
transportation?
Yeah.
Do you have more, Jack?
Yeah, a little bit more, but if there's
Okay.
something else you have, I mean,
No.
I will answer the one thing up on page 17. It was asked that I might get asked about iPads tonight. Here's the good news. They're not budgeted for this year.
Yeah, that's
They're
one.
going to be next year. The bad news is there's no savings. So on page 17 of your budget, under
Because we're not
technology, we
buying it.
address that issue. And then John and I will talk about transportation. We had a meeting yesterday with the transportation director and kind of where we're starting to go.
Thank you. No, thanks.
Yeah, crossing guards, okay.
Oh.
Share one? Anybody need this? Oh, okay. Cool. I'm just trying to be flexible.
All right, so Jack, want me to start with this one?
Yeah, sure, go ahead.
So I'll start with the side that talks about common out-of-district placements for us, Pembroke, Bow, and Merrimack Valley. I thought that was our radius that made sense because, you know, you can only drive so far to pick up and bring together because you're going to elongate the route so much that it won't make any sense to do it for any of us.
Yeah.
So I tried to say, what are commonalities amongst what's we met? We spoke to each of them and said, hey, if we were thinking about combining and doing things, would you be interested? The answer was yes. And they said, but preliminary, you know, we're just at the beginning of going down this road. But then we got a list of all their placements and we compared them to what was commonalities, and I gave you that list of these are the commonalities. To start this process, we have to figure out, is it doable? And I kind of put what programs we all commonly use and then kind of where they are to give you kind of a radius of where we go to. There's much more programs we all use, but again, we couldn't really share because they're not even geographically going the same way when I looked at that. So this gives you an idea of kind of what it would be, depending on where they live. I mean, this is still so, as I said, you know, this gets into the scheduling software of things where they actually live. Because Merrimack Valley is got an area, you know, so does Bow and you know, Pembroke could be way out. So it makes no sense to drive a half hour to get a kid, then turn around and drive a half hour back towards Chelmsford, Mass. It doesn't make any sense. So it's kind of like we have to figure that out down the road. But at least it's an idea, so it gave you an idea of how many are common placements that we could actually share some rides for our different places. So that's where we started. Kind of looked at that.
Okay, so you just did this side, right?
Yeah.
And then, on the other side, what we've tried to do is try to figure out how we start going from left to right, and I'll explain that. So we look at the big bus routes, okay? We have eligible riders, 2,000 that are home to school riders. Then you have about 1,000 that are sports and field trips for the year. And then also programs, late buses, so like 21C or after-school athletics. So you're looking at about potentially 3,200 riders on the 77 to 89 passenger buses, depending on what they need and what the student needs are. So that's equivalent to 17 routes, 16 drivers, and that's 17 in-house routes, and nothing is contracted out on the big bus side of it. And right now, he's projecting he needs 4 urgent hires. Obviously, the things that the new CBA that you just put in place for this year, we're hopeful initial. We have had a +1 since that's happened. Hey, you know, it's the little things that can make us happy.
That's all we needed, right?
Yeah. What's that score again now, Jay?
They won 3-1.
So when we get into the small bus, this is where things have gone from right to left. Forget the political ideology here, but I'm just trying to I'm trying to move. Where we had 200 riders, we handled this all in-house. Post-COVID, that line has slid into eating in. So 52 of those 200 slots are contracted using contractors, about 16 different vehicles from 6 different companies. We estimate that's at least $1 million just servicing, and this is Concord to Concord, okay?
Okay.
So we're targeting that first. Part of that is going to be, 1, we had 2 non-CDL. We just purchased 2 more, so that's 4 non-CDL. We don't have drivers for them, is the problem. And I think he had said 10 days to make one of these drivers. It's 60 days to make a big bus driver. So obviously targeting the non-CL doesn't have that as high a threshold, okay? So we're targeting to try to start moving things from the left to the right and eat into that 52. But he's going to need to hire at least 5 drivers. So we need to get on to that piece. Then we can start moving into the normal 24, 26 riders of those out of district that John just told you on the other side.
Yeah.
How do we start targeting it? And does it make fiscal sense to target it, or no, we just going to stick with the some of the contracted services?
And when we say out of district, it's not necessarily out of district placed. It's kids that foster home. Remember all the
Yep.
categories talking
Yep.
about foster, homeless. I call them out of district because they're leaving the district, and that's kind of
Right.
why it is. But it's not necessarily students who are placed out of district. These are multiple factors. But just for the point of what you're looking at that number, it's all of the factors together.
So the couple things we came up with yesterday that we've started to discuss, again, we have 4 non-CDL buses. The rest of the buses, which are 12, I'm sorry, let me back off here. With 2 new ones came, I don't know if the other 2 came out. I think there's 10 CDL buses. So we've asked
10
a couple.
CDL small buses?
Small buses, sorry.
Thank you.
Yep. So that's what I'm roughing based on,
Yeah.
I'm figuring the 2 that he replaced are still somewhat active because they haven't gone to auction yet. So either way, there should be about 12. So if we have non-CDL buses and we feel, I've asked him, we focus and we could start getting the hires in. What does it make sense, one, because I've seen a 2014 bus, which is 10 years old. Does it make sense, one, to trade in that bus and get a non-CDL bus? Okay. 2, would it make sense, because our vendor has 6 non-CDL buses on the lot. Of the 6, 1 is a handicap accessible bus. Does it make sense to lease them for a year and get the buses here? In addition to these, rather than outlay, they're about $94,000 a bus. So you outlay to buy 3 buses at almost $300,000 versus if we lease 3 of them for a year, just trying to get this started and determine, okay, buy it out.
So year
So
is
the
like
capital
proof of
cost.
concept?
Exactly. That's what we're trying to do. Fade this in. But without drivers, doesn't matter if I lease these buses. But he has 6 on-premise buses ready to go.
Quick question.
Yep.
Would he give you a deal for locking in to say like 1 leasing cycle with the anticipation of purchase?
Yeah, there's a couple things I've negotiated. That and also upfront payment. So instead of paying monthly, which is like $2,300, typically any of these things when we get into, even our bonds, they're paid once or twice a year.
Gotcha.
So what if I do a 1 year? Because they already service.
They want money in their
Thomas
hand
is their
anyway.
rep.
Yeah.
Exactly. You know.
Okay.
So yes, we've already started that
Great.
negotiation.
And
Love that.
the changes we made to the
CBA.
bus driver CBA, will that address does that address the non-CDL drivers? I can't remember off the top of my head.
No.
No. So
No, so we can go into non-public to talk about where that is if
Okay.
you want. When and
is
if
it
you
a
want.
different
But
contract?
again, we'll
Okay.
we'll
Okay.
talk about it in non-public if you want to go there.
Okay.
And I can give you an update on where that is.
Okay.
So does that help to give you kind of the
Yeah.
projection? I mean, we look at that million and don't want to just say, well, let's throw it at it without trying to figure out how can we take care of the small stuff first, which to us seems to be Concord
Yeah.
Concord residents already.
And just so the board, Terry Karate been really instrumental in these numbers, and he met with us yesterday for a couple hours. to
That's
do
awesome.
this.
Yeah.
I really
We've
appreciate
been
that.
trying to bring them into the fold and get this
Ms.
ready to go.
Miko?
Thank you. This is awesome,
Yep.
and it really helps me understand how we would have a phased approach to this. So I'm very excited about this information. With this initial phase, are we even touching this potential networked relationships with other locations, or is it off the table?
Possibly it can be a blend of both. Like I said, the conversation today was very preliminary. It was me picking up the phone and Jessica McKay, our
That's how it
coordinator
starts, yeah.
of programs, picking up the phone and just talking to people. But there may be a way to talk to our vendors to say, hey, you know, what can we do differently for next year than we're currently doing if we agree to ridership to these places now? And try to work, you know,
Like
there's
a
a
joint
range.
contract
Like I
as
said, there's a
opposed to-
range from 400 to 700 we're paying right now. for daily ridership. We may say, bring us down near the 400 and we'll agree to the rides for these and try to do some of that negotiation. So we're going to start those conversations amongst districts. And if it's multiple districts, they may be more willing to do that.
Great.
So that's kind of in addition to doing all this, we're looking at what can we do now
Right.
to kind of try to control some of this. It's not all of it, but some of it. And then fix our in-district problem right now, too.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think the potential for partnership and revenue is at this point like a separate track, right? Like we're still potentially we're looking at cost savings through this phased approach, and then the potential revenue is just gravy, as opposed to
Down the
like
road.
going all the way and then expecting revenue in order to fill that,
Yeah.
backfill it. So I appreciate that. Thank you.
Yeah, and I said, like, there's a lot more to this that I kind of would just want to restate that has to do with, it so depends on where the location of the actual student lives.
Right.
Right.
You know, because being where we are in our location, even from one side of Concord to the other, one side of Merrimack Valley's district to ours is sometimes a long ride. And it may not make sense if we're sitting near the highway to drive a half hour out to get someone to come back to go south.
Yeah.
And that's what we'll figure out with the vendors as we
Yeah.
get through into this.
Can we get an updated, you had a cost estimate sheet, and I guess if we're going sort of this phased approach, how many of those other expenses do we need if we're looking at the
Right.
lease? What is the upfront cost? Can we estimate savings in this budget? And, do we need to hire another scheduling person?
Sure, yeah.
Or, I had concerns that why did we need separate software, especially if we're doing it in Concord, So I'd like to see that updated.
Yep.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, we can give you an idea there.
And just, I mean, this is just me commentating now, but I think it's hard to step into something new. There are going to be risks. There are going to be little bumps along the way, and I'm just speaking for myself. I'm comfortable with that in an attempt to get to a solution with this very difficult issue. I really don't think that there's a path to doing nothing. So I think that, just from my own personal perspective, I get it. Like, we don't know exactly what's going to happen, and I'm okay with that because we're being careful, and you guys are being very diligent. So I appreciate it.
And when you look at the number of drivers that you're already budgeting and have vacant, how much of that can we utilize before we start
Right.
running into this one-shot money of $1 million from your trust fund to offset the expense? So we obviously, pre-COVID, used to be able to do this, but it's just gotten so much more difficult. And the student population is much more fluid, as John can attest. I mean, we were
Well,
talking about
housing
it.
is so much more difficult.
Housing.
Right.
A student
There's just a
student
lot
might
of
be a
external
foster
factors. Yeah.
homeless in the morning, and in the afternoon the status has changed based on circumstances.
Right.
I mean, you told me about the example today, and I was like, it's amazing to me. So, but
Right.
once,
districts
Are expected to manage.
yeah, and we're not the only ones. I'm sure they would welcome somebody leading the effort to try to solve all our challenges on this. Okay.
Solve all our problems.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to try, the very last item is the safe pedestrian crossing, which you asked me
I already put
to
it
try to do a little bit of digging around it. And so you asked for particular information. So I'm going to try to go through this quickly because you're pretty familiar with it. We have 8 locations. I listed those locations. And you can see where they are and what schools that they cover. Just know that on Warren Street, we have the covered. The guard covers multiple places. So don't, like, one guard will cover Runlet and the high school. Because of the changes of time. Right. Okay.
The changing of the guard.
And she is beloved.
Yeah, and currently, the city does have a flashing beacon on Whitney Road. I don't know if you know that, but they do, and they have a roundabout out there. They also had considered, in some of the research that I looked at, was another one on North Main Street, which personally I think they could use if you're over there at the end of North Main Street. But anyway, that's not for me to decide. And right now there are 2 vacancies for guards, but lo and behold, I'm driving to work this week after I wrote this up, and we have a new guard, crossing guard on Center Street.
Oh,
Which is, yeah, I know, which is the one place that I was really most concerned about, but he's out there, and
great.
he just came on board. I think that Pam had a great question, because you all said, how come there's 2 guards at the high school? Well, he was visiting each site, so he knew what to do and where to go. So that's why there were 2 guards out there. The days, I think it was the day you all
It
up
was
there
the
for
day of the legislative breakfast, yeah.
Yeah. But anyway, so my report indicated 2 vacancies. We have 1 vacancy, just so you know that. The hours are pretty straightforward, 1 hour in the morning, 1 hour in the afternoon, so it's a 2-hour job. And again, I indicated that 1 guard covers 2 locations. So the proposal that I have for you for a rapid, they call it a rapid flashing beacon, and I've seen them everywhere. I actually was cutting through Derry this morning by Pinkerton Academy, and their flashing beacons were out there because that's Route 28. Kids are crossing over all the time over there. And so it's being used quite a bit as a safety challenge. My concern was particularly Center Street. You have cars on both sides of the street. You also have, when you have a street coming out onto Center, you have cars on each side of that where the road comes out. So you can't really see. If you have a low car or a little child who's walking across, I do worry about that. And so the flashing beacon is really, it's a system where you press the beacon and it flashes, and boy, you can't miss it. Trust me, you can't miss it. So I thought, that was a good solution. Then I looked at the costs associated with it. One of the units would cost about $25,000 based on, again, that varies a little bit depending on what you want, what size it is, and all that. But the average price was $25,000 for the beacon. The average cost of a crossing guard is $5,500. So when I looked at it, well, what would the payback be, right? After 5 years, you'd pay it off, right? Because you wouldn't have a crossing guard there. So if you want to look at this proposal as a payback, it is in essence, because you wouldn't need the crossing guard. So you would be able to pay back. I put some advantages. Certainly, it's a visual reminder for cars and pedestrian crossings. And again, the 2 places that have been really problematic: Beaver Meadow and Center. We've struggled. Imagine we just found somebody. Here we are, March 16th or 15th, whatever today's date is, 12th. We just found a crossing guard after all year, and that was really problematic for me. And he retired, and our team of crossing guards, they're a little bit older and mature, and they're great for the kids. But also, they don't last as long for us, right? Because they do retire. The advantages, it operates 24/7. It could be Saturday or Sunday morning or whatever when people are out walking. I think it's an advantage for not only our school kids, but for the city in general. What are the disadvantages? Well, it removes the personal touch. Everybody remembers their crossing guard if you had one when you went to school, right? You remember that person that took you across the street every morning with a sign and all that. So there's that personal touch that always happens with somebody like that. First thing in the morning, last thing at the end of the day. It's like the bus drivers. I always tell the bus drivers, you are the first person those kids see in the morning, and you are the last person they see at night. And same for the crossing guards, for our kids that are walkers. And of course, always, costs are always a disadvantage when you're trying to do a budget. Anyway, that was a quick nutshell. I hope I answered and captured what you had thinking about in terms of this as a budget item.
I have questions about this.
Okay.
When we were having conversations about changing the location of the middle school, repairs and improvements to city infrastructure like streets are the responsibility of the city, correct? That's like, we were running up against that in conversation. So the reason I ask, and I can expand on it, is, this the city councilors have made it very clear to us how important walkable communities are. They spent a lot of energy and time educating us on that.
Safe routes to school.
Safe routes to school are very clearly a high priority for this city. So I'm wondering why something like this would come out of the school district budget as opposed to it being an improvement of city infrastructure and also being very close to something that our city councilors have been very vocal about over the past 3 years.
I don't think you need to answer
No.
the question. I think it's a very good point.
It's a great question.
It's something to discuss.
It is something
It's something to discuss. Just wanted to
And
put that out there.
I
Definitely
intend
something
to continue that discussion.
Oh,
I
for
do want you to
sure.
know,
Interest in
last
that, yeah.
night, did you make the Washington Street meeting?
No, I went to
Okay.
the Memorial
Terry-
Field
Yeah,
meeting.
the city met last night to talk about Washington Street and Center. Out here, right? And it's a, I don't know if you're there in the morning.
Oh, it's
at night.
sketchy. Yeah.
It's scary because people are cutting straight across.
It's that
a
weird-
very wide street,
Yeah.
and so Terry was important because buses come through there. How do buses maneuver there? Plus, you always have to worry about the parking from all of the students at the law school. So anyway, one of the things that came up, and it wasn't generated by us, but by some constituents, asking about the flashing beacon. So there is an interest in it, and they thought it would be a really good idea, especially on Center Street. So
Okay.
it's out there, and I think we will continue, as Jim said, to have discussions.
I think, I guess is if we want to see this move, we probably need to get to the point where we put a formal request into probably the city's transportation committee to add a flashing beacon light on Center. I mean, I think you should bring us a proposal letter to the city that we can send asking them to add this.
I'd ask for all 8,
Yeah, I was gonna say, I wouldn't limit it to just Center.
right? I mean, one.
You may prioritize them,
Right.
but I'd ask.
They
for
may
all
have
of
to,
them.
but that would be up to them to prioritize them.
Right. And I think it's a pretty simple process of submitting the letter, and then at the next city council meeting, they refer it to the proper committee. So then it
Yeah.
becomes, so it's really not much of a lift for us. I'm sorry.
So are you asking me to
Yes,
put
please.
together a letter
Yeah, that would be
from the
great.
board to
Yeah.
support this that's great.
Do we have to vote on it?
Do we want to see the letter before we vote, or just direct the superintendent and me to do that?
ability to do that work.
To model it from this material. So
Yeah.
no surprises or anything.
I mean, just send them this.
All right, all in.
I was gonna say, if the president of the board has an opportunity to see it and is okay with it, I'm fine with it.
All right.
I
so-
tend to do that. I
I-
tend to send.
Yes,
have
well,
people
I'm
look
happy
at
to sign off on the letter.
it. Okay.
So, all in favor?
So you,
Can I have a motion?
I will make a motion.
Then I will
to structure.
second that motion.
A motion by Mr. Richards to send a letter to the city council requesting the addition of flashing beacon lights at key locations for student safety and for walkability.
Right. And I would specify
And
these
citizen
locations.
safety.
And citizen safety and walkability, yes. And seconded by Ms. Robin.
Yes, yes, thank you.
Is there further discussion? All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries.
Fantastic.
I will take a motion to adjourn unless we have other business.
I just want to remind you that given the fact that the boys did win, the championship game is Saturday night. So I don't have the time yet. They do the schedule because I think all divisions will be there, and they schedule them throughout the day. I'll send you out that note as soon as I get that information.
Thank you.
Well, and we certainly wish them well, and they should know they have our support.
Congratulations.
If you get to see them play, I saw them Saturday night when they played against
so fun,
Manchester.
huh?
They are a excellent team. They're very disciplined, and they are fast skaters. Let me tell you.
I think the girls team did. I know that they had a tough loss, but they did a great job.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I probably won't go because the one game I went to this year, I think it's the game the boys is the one they
Don't
lost.
jinx 'em.
I appreciate your superstition.
And I would ask you to stay home.
I will make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
Moved by Ms. Robinson. Is there a second?
Second.
Second by Ms. Boucher. All in favor? Aye. Any opposed? Motion carries. Good night. See you all Monday at Millbrook.